Mr. Chairman, I got a
ma'am.
question for the administration.
Yes, sir.
Thank you. Thank you, Ms. Beals, for your testimony. So, first of all, do you agree that right now, current law requires the voter to present an ID initially when they present themselves at the polling place?
So when a voter goes to vote, they are asked for an ID, but if they do not have an ID, they are allowed to vote without an ID when they sign a confirmation statement.
Further question, Mr. Chairman?
Yes, sir.
You agree that's under penalty of a felony prosecution if they lie?
It is, but it's sort of hard to follow up if the person's forging a name. You don't know who that person is.
Okay, Mr. Chairman?
Yes, sir.
Further question. Is the department aware of a single person that's been prosecuted in Virginia for faking their identity in order to vote, say, since you've been commissioner or maybe in the last 5 years?
I have not been aware of that the time since I've been commissioner.
Further question, Mr. Chairman?
Yes, sir. We're not in court now.
I got it. Well,
All right.
The administration's supporting this bill this year, which is a little different than the last 8 years. I have a bunch of cloistered nuns who live in my district. Sisters of Poor Clare, they live up on Beacon Hill next to a school. I'm pretty sure they don't have any ID. If we were to adopt this policy, how would you propose that these nuns in my district would be able to vote?
Do they have a social security number?
I assume. I don't know.
You need
Never
a social
asked
security number to register to vote in Virginia.
Okay, Mr. Chairman, further question.
Yes, sir. After this, we're going to move to somebody else.
Okay, then I'm going to put multiple questions together. They don't have an ID. They don't have a state-issued ID because they're nuns. They don't need it. They live in a monastery. They don't go out very much. I'm worried about them. I've met people in my district who are in their upper 90s who don't get their license renewed because they can't drive anymore. I've been in a courthouse every day where I see dozens and dozens of people, if not thousands statewide, whose licenses are taken by a judge because they happen to be in court in close proximity when they have to go to court. I believe last time I checked with the DMV, there was over 400,000 licenses that are suspended every year. And I've also had many of my clients who lose their license because they're forgetful, they lose their wallet, they lose track of it. And my question is the administration concerned about any of these people not being able to exercise their constitutional right to vote simply because of fortuity, because they happen to have a court date recently, because they happen to be really old? You know, do any of those things concern the administration?
So thankfully, this bill makes accommodations for those who do not have an ID by offering them a free photo ID that can be made for them in a registrar's office.
I have a comment in part to the gentleman who testified, and I want to put this bill in context. There is not a fundamental right to fly on an airplane. The right to vote is a fundamental right to American democracy. That from day one on our shores here in Virginia, voter suppression occurred on day one. The very first vote held in Virginia on who would lead the council at Jamestown involved voter suppression to keep John Smith from becoming chair. Ever since, and I just did an article covering the history of voting rights in Virginia. Ever since, laws were passed to keep people from voting who the majority in power feared would put them out of power. And after formerly enslaved people in this Commonwealth gained the right to vote in the 1868 Constitution, as soon as the same people who fought to keep them enslaved returned to power, they put provisions in place to strip those people of the right to vote. And we have been fighting ever since to make true that this is a government by, of, and for all the people. And any barriers to the ability to exercise that right, members of the Legislative Black Caucus, myself included, have fought. There are a lot of people that don't have a photo ID, which you've already gone into. And what this bill does is put a barrier in their way, including, yes, they can vote by provisional ballot, but they have to come back. That's an extra step that for many of them, particularly if they're elderly, and many of the people without an ID are elderly, may be homebound, need to get another ride, or someone may have to find someone to care for their children for another day. That's why we repealed this requirement years ago, and that's why I oppose this bill now. So some of us remember when the voter ID bill was first passed, when Governor McDonnell was governor. Democracy didn't fall before it was passed. But I want to make a couple of really clear points. There are a lot of laws that have been passed in Virginia with the argument this is not a big deal. It's only a few people that this is going to affect. The vast majority of people will be able to vote. And it was death by 1,000 cuts that put barrier after barrier after barrier in people's way. Many of them creatively, once the 15th Amendment was passed and the 14th Amendment were passed, that made it clear you couldn't discriminate on the basis of race. So it was barrier after barrier after barrier that just so happened to prevent some people, a minority of people, a small number of people from voting. The vast majority of people could pay poll taxes. My father had to pay them. That makes me and everybody else who has had a family member that had to jump through hoop after hoop after hoop that wasn't a big deal for other people, very sensitive to measures that are going to put barriers in the way of casting a fundamental right. There is no fundamental right to smoke. There is no fundamental right to be on an airplane, or most of the other examples we got today. That is why, at the time, Delegate Sproul, Delegate Surovell, and myself, among others, fought this bill when it was first introduced over a decade ago. That's why we worked to repeal it. That's why we're going to vote against it today. It is a big deal.
Yes, sir.
Mr. Chairman, I appreciate we've got a couple of anecdotes which nobody's been able to investigate, but maybe perhaps with the Attorney General's new voter integrity unit, we might get some clarity about the issue. Notwithstanding that, we have 5.4 million registered voters in Virginia, and one anecdote doesn't seem to me to be the reason to change the whole law, so I'd move to PBI.